Welcome again to Lifecycle of a Federal Lands Project. We will be hearing from Joe Brennan as well as Tiffany Allen today. I'm John Andrioni, one of the management analysts with the Soil and Plant Science Division, who also helps support our work on federal lands. Ben Hannibal is another management analyst, works at the headquarters, who also assists with this work, and you can see all of our contact information here. We are the SPSD Federal Lands team, so consider us contacts if you are a federal partner or an SPSD employee or NRCS employee with questions on how we work on federal lands. The presentation today will talk about our processes for how we start a project on federal lands, whether they be Forest Service through DOI or through USDA or other federal lands, DOD for example, and what are best practices for running a project, an MLRA project of soil survey or ecological sites on those federal lands. Joe Brennan, who will be our first speaker, is a soil data quality specialist in Minnesota. He is a Federal Lands Liaison, as you can see, for the U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management, and he will be our first speaker. Tiffany Allen will follow after that. She is a MLRA project leader in North Carolina and is also the Federal Lands Liaison to the National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the Department of Defense. I will hand it off now to Joe as our first speaker.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, John. I appreciate the introduction here. Every year, division leadership schedules a meeting of the Federal Lands Advisory Group to discuss some mutual priorities on federal lands with our partners. But we know this year there's been changes, and these virtual sessions have really allowed us to expand our reach with this group. As John said, this is the first webinar of a series on federal lands, and we're going to go through the workflow of a field-oriented federal land soil survey or ecological site project. And MLRA staff currently in NRCS have over 100 active field-based projects on federal lands. And hopefully if we're successful today, we're going to clarify working with federal partnership to bring some consistency to our cooperative efforts. And I wanted to mention as well that the liaison role is kind of a collateral duty for all of us, as John mentioned. So we bring the perspective of the field from Tiffany and the regional level from myself to our roles as liaison. And I also wanted to mention that we also hope to bring some additional folks into these roles as well from the field. So that's who we are. Now, what exactly do we do? And I guess I'll start off by saying agreements have really been central to our role as liaisons, and we're going to be the primary contacts for most of our interagency agreements on federal lands. So when there's a need from a partner and it's brought to our attention, we then work with the regions to make sure we're well positioned to service an agency-sponsored priority through agreements. And then we negotiate the terms of these agreements with our partner, and we monitor the agreements from signature all the way through successful completion of the work. And while Tiffany and I are the technical contacts for federal agreements and memoranda of understandings, the regions and the MLRA staff still are the leaders in the technical aspects of the project. We're simply here to monitor progress and ensure we have the resources to meet the deliverables and that our products meet standards, and just making sure we approach our work on federal lands with some level of consistency. And we also want to be sure we address any concerns that may arise from the partners through the course of the project. And agreements are going to continue to be a major part of our work, but we've begun to think about how we can better work outside of these funded situations. And we've been engaging our partners and working through national MOUs. And we know there's going to be projects out there where the partners just don't have the financial resources to support our work, but may be able to contribute in many other ways. I also wanted to mention that we look for opportunities to collaborate on interagency cross trainings, and we'll continue to work with any of the relevant focus teams and the partnership on this. And I'd also like to note that if the partners have any interpretive questions or questions on specific products, please feel free to reach out. Even if Tiffany and I or John or Ben don't know the answers, we'll know how to get them. So generally speaking, we're simply here to serve our federal partners and assist with division priorities across the federal lands. So let's talk a bit more about priority work. Oops. Oh. Jumped ahead here. I'm having a little lag. Okay. And from the division here, a top priority right now on federal lands is going to be accelerating the initial soil survey work. And while we have a digital product in Surgo and web soil survey for most of the conterminous U.S., 90% of the 117 million acres that are remaining are federal. And the vast majority of this is under the jurisdiction of Forest Service, BLM, and the National Park Service. And as you can see here, Alaska has even more unmapped acres, both federal and non-federal. But plans are taking shape from within the regions for these first over inventories. And if you tune in again to what John said with this next installment of the webinar series, you're going to find more information about our plans on accelerating the initial. But regardless of when we complete the initial, we're never really done understanding soils and ecosystems, and we're going to continue to work with federal partners and update priorities. And actually, much of our staff is already working on updates, and in fact, there's already a couple dozen field-oriented update projects on federal lands that are scheduled for 2021 in these green areas of the map. So going back to agreements, we have currently about 25 federal lands projects that have been made possible with the support of BLM, Park Service, Forest Service, or Fish and Wildlife. And most of these projects are focused on initial soil survey, and most have an ecological component of the work as well. But we have several update projects and some ESD-specific projects that we're working through agreements as well. And interagency agreements are really a great way to get things done between agencies. So I just wanted to be sure to emphasize to everyone, if we have a signed contribution agreement, we're fully committed to the project and we're fully committed to the deliverables. And with these agreements, the partners really have more say in negotiating how we prioritize work, how our products take shape, and also the sequence with which we deliver our products. So we hope to continue to prove the utility of these agreements as we move from producing Surgo to really developing a whole array of products from ESDs and custom interps to spatially refined digital soil maps and ecological maps, and ultimately in the future dynamic soil surveys. And I wanted to mention as well here the authority citation at the bottom of the page is the specific authority that NRCS can utilize to service interagency agreements with our partners. And the benefit of that is the partners can really cite whatever authority best suits their funding source. And the last thing I want to talk about with working or these interagency agreements is if a partner is interested in entering an agreement or initiating a project, it's best that those discussions begin as early as possible in a fiscal year. The fourth quarter is going to be too late for us to really begin the process if we're going to execute an agreement that fiscal year. So again, just feel free to reach out to one of us or your local regional director if there's some interest in a new agreement or a modification to an existing one. But again, let's get beyond the interagency agreements and talk more about MOUs. We've been working with each of our major federal lands partners to get MOUs drafted to frame our cooperation over the next 5 years. In survey, we're used to initiating the MOU at the very beginning of an initial project, but our revised approach for mapping the remaining federal lands is implementing the MOU at a national level with each of our major federal land management partners rather than drafting up dozens upon dozens of specific MOUs for every national park, national forest, or BLM project. And we want these MOUs to support cooperative work at the field level, and we want that to be beyond the agreement structure, the formal agreement structure. And we also want the MOU to go beyond just completing the initial soil survey and reference all the other ways that we'll continue to collaborate over the next 5 years. So I just want to be sure to thank our partners who we've collaborated with on these MOUs. that being Ron McCormick and Scott Davis and Eric Eisler with BLM, and Jason Kenworthy with National Park Service, and Larry Lang and Andy Coulter and Rob Vaughn as well with the Forest Service. And as we get into the question and answers later on, we're going to have Jason with the Park Service and Larry and Andy with the Forest Service involved in the discussion. So please feel free to direct some of your questions on interagency work to them as well when we get into that Q&A session. And so again, speaking of the Forest Service, I did want to outline a few specifics with the Forest Service, with about half of the initial lands in the lower 48 actually being in national forests. And the Forest Service is a really engaged partner in cooperative soil survey, and we agree on the direction of completing the initial soil survey and provisional ecological sites by 2026, according to standards and interagency direction. And we also agree on the need to take advantage of new technology and some different approaches to mapping and provide cross-training. And I can say I've already witnessed this taking shape in several different situations on the national forests. But we recognize also that Forest Service directives require their use of the hierarchical framework of ecological units to inform planning, monitoring, and inventory programs. And the higher order of this hierarchy is EcoMap. And Forest Service is currently updating this just as we're updating the MLRAs with NRCS. The TUI system references, or let's call it TUI, references the more detailed component of the hierarchy at the landscape and land unit scale. And TUI development guidance actually references several national cooperative soil survey standards. And TUI is really seen as critical to the Forest Service, and it's cited in this MOU as their primary business need. Land type associations are the most general units of TUI, but they still have a lot of utility with the ecological integrity component of the planning rule of 2012, which governs forest planning based on patterns of landforms, vegetation, soils, geology, and climate. And the Forest Service is now developing a national TUI strategy and implementation plan that's being modeled off of what's already been done in their eastern region, and they're developing that just as we're developing our 2026 plan. So ultimately, even though our systems differ in their criteria and scales, we agree to continue to capitalize on our ability to define some compatible concepts while we're out there and find common lines of significance in our mapping. So now hitting some of the high points of all of our MOUs collectively, we're really looking to institutionalize working closely with our partners in project planning while recognizing the unique needs of each partner and generally framing our efforts as soil and ecological unit inventories. And we've agreed to continue to pursue these interagency agreements to support priority work when the resources are there, but know that might not always be the case. But further, we're agreeing on collaborating on technology and data sharing and recognizing each federal partner has other inventory programs that can benefit our cooperative work. We've tried to state some general expectations for all parties in safety planning and cultural and biological clearance. And we'd also kind of tried to envision how logistics and personnel can maybe be shared in support of some of our projects. So there are a few attachments to this MOU, or these three MOUs that are in draft. Or I should say 2 MOUs that are finalized with National Park Service and U.S. Forest Service, and one that's in draft with the Bureau of Land Management. But we simply want to, we've attached some citations for the different technical references from each agency, recognizing, for example, the technical standards of the TUI program with the Forest Service are unique from what's outlined in the handbook, National Soil Survey Handbook and the National Ecological Site Handbook, or that the product of the National Park Service Inventories 2.0 are not exactly the same as those National Park Soil Surveys of the past, even though they may be just as relevant to our soil survey. We simply want to ensure that our staff who are working on cooperative federal lands projects are aware of these cooperative technical resources and that they're referenced whenever practical with an expectation that we're going to continue to develop complementary products. And we also want to cite technical references that we also share like the Interagency ESD implementation plan that's been agreed upon by BLM, Forest Service, and NRCS. And the second attachment is the Alaska Region Safety Policy, and it's just really to define that policy uniquely from elsewhere. And in each MOU, we've also introduced a template for a document that we're calling the Statement of Commitment, which is, again, cited in each MOU, but is just a template, and it's intended to document the more localized and project-specific items, agreed-to items of a given project. So let's talk a little more about this Statement of Commitment. Again, it's intended for the local project contacts to develop these, and the templates are not intended to be copied and pasted. They really need to reflect the unique conditions of each project. So if there are specific archaeological expectations in a project area, that's going to be addressed in the agreed-to items. Or if there's wilderness or permitting involved, or we're somehow reliant on PAC support, that can be addressed here. If the partner is going to dedicate in-kind services or can add some seasonal staff to support project work, that can be documented here. If there are some specific expectations from the partner on roles and quality control, this is the place for those expectations to be expressed. The Statement of Commitment isn't the project plan, but it outlines the expectations of each party in making the project a success mutually. So we're really looking to identify from our partner an administrative contact and a technical contact to pair with our regional director and our MLRA project leader. And we liaisons should also review and concur with these documents along with the regional director. But unlike an interagency agreement, the Statement of Commitment is non-binding, but we expect an earnest commitment to the agreed-to items from our MLRA staff, and I suspect we have that same kind of support from the partners we've worked with as well. If there was an interagency agreement, I don't know if this document would be necessary unless there are some additional details that need to be addressed, but on the flip side, it's possible an agreement could be born from working through this Statement of Commitment. So the bottom line is NRCS will reference working agreements whenever we're making a significant commitment to a field-oriented project on federal lands. And the main two working agreements on federal lands are national MOUs with our federal lands partners, which best support our work where there's no money exchanged through the Statement of Commitment to note some project-specific details. And then we have the interagency agreements where our partners reimburse certain expenses and we negotiate on the statement of work, deliverables, budget, and timing. And for our MLRA folks, I want to emphasize that the Statement of Commitment is really intended to complement the project plan and introduce some of the needs you've identified in the plan to the partner. And I'd also like to say, too, that the details of the project plan can and may evolve as we identify what resources the partner can commit to a project. And Tiffany is going to talk a lot more about project planning ahead, but a well-developed plan with input of the technical team and concurrence of management should really inform the Statement of Commitment. And we think that having these two documents together, the plan and the Statement of Commitment, are going to position us for success. And Part 606 of the National Soil Survey Handbook has been our guidance for working agreements, and we've proposed a significant simplification of this chapter following what we've been discussing today. And we've attached those proposed edits directly to this session, and they're very, very soon going to be through the 30-day review. So we hope to have some of you take a look at this and provide some comments. And we're looking, again, for a uniform process in planning and working agreements on federal lands, whether we're doing an initial soil survey project, an update project, or an ESD project, or any sort of combination thereof. So again, putting the concept of working agreements into motion in the project process. In the past, if we're following guidance, management would initiate the MOU at the beginning of an initial soil survey project, and then the staff would generate a work plan and spend the next several years executing that work plan prior to publishing. Whereas now we're really looking to have that MOU already in place with the federal partners nationally. So that MLRA staff can go right into soliciting that background information from the partners as members of the tech team, and then draft a work plan for management to approve, which will then set in motion the MLRA staff and partners drafting the statement of commitment. We can also look for ways to subdivide the project based on different needs in different areas or the ability to progressively publish a project. And the statement of commitment can be amended as the nature of the project changes. Let's say we go from an office of 4 to an office of 1, or if there are some sort of clearance policies that change through the project. And again, this process can apply to any kind of project. And I also wanted to outline a general timeline of interagency agreements for a general awareness. It always starts with the need from the partner and us then working with the regions to assure that we're positioned or well-positioned to service an agreement. And from there, we begin to negotiate with the partner on project specifics and deliverables and draft a statement of work and a budget. And then the partner initiates the agreement and the federal lands team would then coordinate it through execution. And then after that, the MLRA staff that's servicing the area would draft a work plan to meet the deliverables and execute the plan following approval. So assuming we're able to build the agreement into a 5-year structure, we may be able to add multiple project priorities as shown here, and we can even entertain unique types of projects through a single agreement. And the multiple order structure allows us to field smaller budgets over multiple years with potential modifications. And again, I want to continue to emphasize that we can progressively publish certain deliverables, and the delivery sequence can be negotiated to meet the needs of the partner. And lastly, again, I'll state that the draft revisions of the handbook is intended to simplify the role of working agreements, especially related to federal lands. And I want to say too that we can look forward to continuing to work with the MLRA staff and partners on the statement of work if there's funding, or the statement of commitment if that's not available. So now that I've covered some of the details with respect to working agreements, I'm going to pass it along to Tiffany to get into the details of the planning and workflow of these with an example project. So take it away, Tiffany.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Okay, as Joe has described in previous slides, there are really 2 main types of federal lands projects. And I'm using the word federal in this presentation. However, working agreements can be between many different types of cooperators. It's not all just on federal lands. But for this presentation, we're going to focus on those working agreements that occur on federal lands. Over the course of the past few years, working as a federal lands liaison, it's really become apparent that there needed to be a template that really assisted offices in establishing effective working relationships with their cooperators and include some level of consistency. As part of the Federal Lands Advisory Group, we have found that often the excellent work and cooperative work that is being completed out there is often unknown. More importantly, as we move into what I'm going to call the next generation of soil survey inventory and ecological site inventory, it's extremely imperative that we share our success and sometimes our challenges. There's really no need to reinvent the wheel sometimes. This is, in fact, an exciting time to be a scientist, and if I do say so myself, it's especially exciting to be a soil scientist. In the past, when working with federal lands, the tendency, as Joe talked about, was to always assume that all cooperative work was funded and a Memorandum of Understanding was established. But moving forward, we want to open a path for both funded and non-funded working agreements, as well as providing a template for how to establish these agreements and work through the agreement in order to finalize the intended deliverable. While funded agreements are important, I want to spend some time actually discussing non-funded agreements, and more specifically, the statement of commitment. This process really is not meant to be intimidating. However, like most projects that we work on, they do require moving through each step in an organized and well-thought fashion. Below you see that I have listed The first steps, just the first few steps actually, in the life cycle of a non-funded working agreement through the statement of commitment. What I'd like to emphasize here is that this is a cooperative working agreement and requires that each cooperating agency or entity have a seat at the planning, implementation, and delivery phase. Let me say that again. This requires that each cooperating agency or entity have a seat at the planning, implementation, and delivery phase, period. There's no I in team, as we've all heard before. The purpose of the statement of commitment, as Joe's talked about, is to identify a mutual goal. You know, what products are intended for delivery, what interpretive needs are out there. We have to agree to provide resources to facilitate a project, and that includes training, logistics, safety measures. And then it identifies the critical points of contact. A little background noise there. All right, so the most critical phase of developing any kind of working agreement is the detailed evaluation phase, right? Everyone involved must have a seat at the table. Ideally, one, some, or all of your cooperators, your technical points of contact, will be on your technical team. When you are in this phase, you need to know what is the mutual goal, right? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. What is the mutual goal? I've always said that if you tell me what you need, let's talk about how we can get there. If you haven't had this discussion, then is it really a working agreement? Can it really be considered a cooperative working agreement? Those are the questions you really have to ask yourself. What do you need? How can we get there? Our national standards may not align from one agency to another, as Joe has described, but the deliverables should have some commonality or usability across the board. So this part of it, the detailed evaluation, is also asking what is the justification for the project? Where does the completion of that project impact? What major resource concerns benefit from project completion? Who is impacted by the project? How are these issues going to be addressed, resolved, and what's the expected outcome? And when you're looking at project planning, again, it has to involve your cooperators, both on the federal or entity. Whoever your cooperator is, it must involve those folks in the planning phase. They have to have a seat at the table. And so the next three steps go into the project extent, looking at existing documentation, and then obviously we want to get the project approved before we actually sign the statement of commitment. So with the project extent, you're going to define your generalized proposed project extent or boundary. Then you're going to compile and evaluate all your existing tabular point data. Is there any data that your cooperator has that can be used in your soil survey inventory or your ecological site inventory? What external sources will be useful for the project within the proposed project extent? All data is not lost, but as we know, all data is not necessarily good data. Project plan would then be reviewed and approved by the management team. Now these first few steps, they will go through several iterations, and again, a significant amount of time and thought should be placed on these critical steps. Dot all the I's and cross all the T's. Once the project has been approved, that is when you begin the statement of commitment. That's when it's developed, and that's when it's signed. I am still hearing some background noise. Okay. As we continue on, I'm going to go through a sample statement of commitment. But as we talked about before, the statement of commitment defines the objectives of the project, defines area of interest and the project extent, commits the necessary resources to complete project and deliverables, and ensures the protocols of participating agencies or entities have been addressed. It outlines the cooperating support for logistics and field sampling, identifies key points of contact, and executes the commitment of participating agencies through authority of appropriate representative. So I'm going to go through a project statement of commitment that we did, or we came up with for the Cohutta Wilderness area. Okay. So these are pretty basic. This is the first page, of the statement of commitment. And as I stated before, the name of cooperating federal agency, sometimes it's not a federal agreement, but that is basically where you're saying this project was approved on this date, and these are the two cooperators. That's probably the easiest page to do. Then we get into the background and objectives. And so what I'd like to note here is that for the soil survey offices that are going to be developing these statement of commitments, that if you actually look at the National Soil Survey Handbook, Part 610, which we can put a link to the National Soil Survey Handbook for everybody, but if you look at that Part 610, Subpart B, that details how we as soil scientists are supposed to develop our project descriptions. And so within our national database, we have a project description that in the first paragraph uses 1,000 characters to describe the project. And so what we're saying here is this is where that 1,000 character project description could go, but essentially you want to be able to use the National Soil Survey Handbook Part 610 as a guide to what information needs to go into this short project description. You're going to put the project extent, the number of acres within the project extent, that's what we're looking for, and then obviously you're going to want to break that project extent down into each of the different federal land categories that you're going to be focusing on within this project area. And you also want to insert a map of the project with an appropriate legend. So then we get into listing out the dedicated project staff, and let's not confuse this with saying dedicated project staff and project staff that we hope we can get. In this, we want to make sure that we're listing all the dedicated project staff that are already assigned to this project. And that should include your regional soil scientist, soil data quality specialist, if there's an ecological site description specialist, all the soil scientists are going to be actually working on the project. As an internal document to NRCS, that is where internally we would list any other resources or staff that we actually would need. And so offices should really be in the habit of putting together an internal document that includes a budget, how many times or how many weeks you're going to be out in the field, any equipment that you're going to need on the internal side that we need to get for you, and then any additional staff that you might need like detailees. And then your soil resource inventory methodology, that's the method that you're going to use to develop your product or your deliverable. In this case, we're using raster soil survey that is then going to also be Surgo, which is going to be all to the project extent. This is a NOTCOM area. Okay. Then what we have following that are the project milestones. And what I really want to talk about here is the significance of these project milestones. The reason why we have these milestones, that we're asking you to put them into the statement of commitment, is that all of the time that you're going to put into this project planning phase and getting the statement of commitment approved, all of that upfront time is going to help both you and your cooperator when we get into the field campaign. So, for instance, when we're giving dates of when we propose to be out in the field, the logistic planning, when we propose to do a technical review, which hopefully members of your cooperating team would be within in that technical review, all of that upfront time is going to help us on the end, because that's less time that both our cooperator would have to spend in the field doing any kind of clearance or logistics. It's just giving them all of the necessary information up front so that we're not having a lot of setbacks in the actual field campaign. And the other thing I want to emphasize here is the sample design and investigation plan. So as we moved, as I said, into the next generation of soil survey inventory, I think it's really important, especially when we're working with our federal lands, that we actually provide our cooperators a pretty sound sample design and investigation plan that lets them know exactly where we're going to be. It doesn't have to be set in stone, but it gives them a general idea about where we're going to be sampling, how we're going to do it, and what that investigation plan looks like, if there's going to be samples sent to the lab, so that when, as I said, when we're doing clearance or any kind of permitting, it makes their job a lot easier so that we can get access to the field a lot quicker. And then the milestones continue on. We want to emphasize the need to do field reviews throughout the field campaign. And again, this was a DSM project, so there are some milestones in here that you may not use. But the field review, and then your QA, QC, all of these have been lumped. So these milestones look a little bit different than what would actually be in our national database, because what we've done is taken these milestones and lumped them together so that we're only indicating which ones are important to our cooperators, and because some of those are internal to just NRCS, so this just allows us to let them know when we're doing the different necessary steps that they may be interested in or may be significant to them. And then we look at the actual the statement of commitment, where we're talking about what each cooperator agrees to do. And so what we want to do is to have these be general, to have, we gave you a template, so all of these are within all of these are within the actual statement of commitment template that is going to be provided. We don't want you to change these up much, but we understand that at a local level, each of the projects won't need all or some of these actual agreed to items. Some are just not going to apply to your actual specific project. And then if we look at the agreed to from the actual cooperator, I want to put some emphasis on FNG. This is where we talk about logistics, and so this is the part where in the past we haven't discussed this much, or we needed something and we didn't know how to ask for it. If there are additional resources that are needed, such as assistance with lodging or camping facilities, assistance out in the field, radio communication, spot devices, assistance with access to trails, roads, locked gates, keys, pack animals, those are where these additional resources need to go. So as I said, you have an internal document that talks about additional resources that NRCS is going to provide, such as detailees, but when we're asking for external resources, this is where that information is going to go. And again, all of these are not necessarily applicable to each and every project. Some are needed, some are not. Then we get to the key points of contact. And so what I really want to emphasize here is that that you need to look back at your detailed evaluation. During your detailed evaluation, did you identify who would be your additional resources? Who would approve any additional resources? Who would actually assist in the field campaign outside of NRCS, so any external assistance? Those are the people that need to be your administrative point of contact and your technical point of contact. So what I'm going with that is that this person needs to be the administrative point of contact is the person who's going to be approving your access, approving your lodging, approving any additional resources that cooperator is going to give us. Your technical technical point of contact may be the person who's actually getting out into the field. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody at a national level. It can be a local Forest Service office, but it needs to be the person, the administrative person needs to be the person that says yay or nay, and the technical point of contact is the person who's reviewing work with you, who's going out in the field with you. That is what that is. That's what that's for. And on the NRCS side, your administrative point of contact is going to be your Soil Survey Regional Director. Your technical point of contact would be your project leader or whoever is going to be supervising the actual project in the field. And then your responsible Federal Lands Liaison is either going to be myself or Joe Brennan. So you're just going to list all of that information within the key points of contact. And last but not least, this was a sample of the Cahata Wilderness Area, so this wasn't actually available when we did it, but this would be the point where you get administrative point of contact signature and your regional director's signature. And that is it for me.
All right. Thank you so much, Tiffany. I'm pleased today to say that we are joined by some of our federal partners. But before that, I do want to just say, if you called into the presenter line, please do mute your line if you are not speaking. We are hearing some background noise. So without further ado, I'm excited to be able to introduce our federal partners who are on the line today with us. First, we'll be hearing from the Forest Service and then from the National Park Service. So I'll first be handing it off to Larry Lang, who is the National Landscape Ecology Program Leader at the Forest Service, and he will introduce his colleague Andy Coulter. And then after him, Jason Kenworthy of the National Park Service. He is the Geologic Resources Leader for the Geologic Resources Division. Will also just do a short introduction. These are our national contacts that we work with on a regular basis to get federal work done. Without further ado, I'll hand it off to you, Larry.
Well, thank you very much. Well, first of all, I wanted to recognize the hard work that Joe and Andy contributed to developing the MOU between the Forest Service and NRCS. And also, it's my pleasure to announce that Andy has been selected and has accepted the role as the Forest Service National Soils Program Leader, and that'll be effective next Monday. And I think Andy's been in an acting position for quite some time, and I found working with him to be a very enjoyable experience, and I'm looking forward to working with him to promote terrestrial ecological unit inventory and also promote the importance of soils. We normally, in our agency, would wait until we had an official announcement by the chief because of the level of the position, but we wanted to make you all aware, given the fact that we have a captive audience that would have strong interest, obviously, in, the importance of the position. So, anyway, very good presentation, and really, really excited about the opportunity to work more closely with the NRCS. So with that, I guess I'll pass it on to Andy.
Thanks, Larry. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm super excited to be coming into the position on a full-time basis. A lot of you on the Forest Service side I've had the pleasure to interact with already, but for those that I haven't, I look forward to having more interaction with you. And then with our partners at NRCS, I look forward to working with you guys a lot more and to help continue to build a relationship and make it stronger and work towards getting our land mapped. And with that, I'll turn it back to the presenters. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Andy. And now I just want to give a chance to Jason from the National Park Service to just do a short introduction.
Hey, thanks, John. Yeah, I'm a obviously, Jason Kenworthy with the National Park Service. I'm in the Washington headquarters office for natural resources, stewardship, and science, based out here in Denver, Colorado, and I'm the Geologic Resources Inventory Coordinator for the Geologic Resources Division. And so our program has been working with NRCS, gosh, since at least the mid-1990s through Pete Bigham to ensure that the parks have dedicated or at least access to existing Surgo quality data for resource management in the National Park Service. And that's been an ongoing project since then, and we're kind of working on wrapping up that phase of our inventories, which we are now terming 1.0. And the Park Service is moving into kind of the next generation of our inventory products, which are less about providing that, quote unquote, just the baseline data, and more about providing either derivative products or other information that's basically teed up and ready to go for resource managers. And an example that we always use from NRCS are the soil interpretations and creating those maps that really give resource managers a look into how the data can be presented in a way that answers whatever questions they have. So over the next, John's been involved in this over the last year or so, and in the next year to come, we're really going to be working on honing those products and processes. So really excited to keep the partnerships going with NRCS. Y'all have been great, and I've certainly learned a lot, and looking forward to keeping that going. And we're glad we got that MOU signed I think just a couple weeks ago. So thanks again to everybody, and I'll put my contact information in the chat if anybody has any questions about national parks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm really glad that all three of you were able to join us today. So we're going to move on to the question and answer period. So if you've been holding on to your questions, now's the time to let them go out into the world, put them in the Q&A pod, and I'll be reading off the questions to our presenters for them to answer. I see some people are putting questions in the chat. That's okay too. It would be great if we could get it in the Q&A pod as well, just so we can keep track of them that way. So I'm going to go first with the first question that hasn't, I think, gotten an answer yet, which is from Gustavo. And this, I think, is a question for both Joe and Tiffany. The question is, can state soil staff or soil survey staff conduct technical soil services to other federal agencies without any agreement or payment?
I asked, this is Tiffany, I deferred to my supervisor, Dave Kingsbury, for his thought on that, because my initial thought was that would be up to the state conservationist to make that call. And I'm going to stand by that, but that's a good question, and I don't know that I know the answer fully to that, but I think that really that would be up to the state conservationist, for the state soil scientists at least.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and we can write a more complete answer to that in the written Q&A as well then. Mm-hmm. I would say also, myself, I would add that the national MOU allows us to do work with our federal agencies without payment or an agreement. So I think that there are situations where SPSD staff have and can provide TSS support to federal agencies. It is, of course, based on capacity and working with the regional director.
And John, the only thing I would add is not knowing the specifics, but the state soil scientist is our primary liaison at the state level to the cooperative soil survey. So I guess it probably depends, but I guess I'd leave it at that.
All right. We can move on to the next question then. So this is from Eva, and she asked, what is the timeline for the review of the National Soil Survey Handbook changes to the Part 606? Is it officially out for review comment? Well, actually, I think I can answer this one. So we have submitted the changes that are in the handouts to the National Leader for Standards, Curtis Monger, last week. And he is going through the process of submitting that to be posted as a national bulletin. So it is in process of being officially out for review comment, but we have given it to him, and it should be out very shortly for that. All right. I'm going to move on to the next question. This is from Samantha, and the question is specifically around the MOU with the Forest Service. So her question is, in that MOU, does that mean we can share information and put data into NRCS? And maybe we'll need to get some clarification from Samantha on that, but Joe, do you have any sort of initial thoughts on that question?
Well, it's hard to know the specifics, but I think generally the answer would be yes. That was sort of the intention of some of the data sharing language that we actually put into the MOU. But I guess it depends specifically what we're talking about putting into NRCS. But you know, if you're talking about some data that was utilized to develop TUI data, that definitely has the potential, and hopefully, you know, Dave might talk a little bit more about this in January as well.
Great, and Samantha did give me some clarification as you were answering, Joe. So I'll say that she also added they're specifically looking to fill in the NOTCOM areas of Forest Service land, and it's talking about Forest Service or partner-provided data to help fill in those NOTCOM areas. Whoop.
Right, and that would be the sort of information that we would look to accept. But you know, it's hard to provide a blanket statement that yes, that should go into Surgo or anything like that. But yes, we should definitely want to integrate that data into our analysis.
Yes, and I would add, and you mentioned it, Joe, the next webinar series, which I'll talk a little bit more on at the end, will be covering how we're going to be working on with NOTCOM areas and federal lands, and one of those approaches is to take partner-provided data and integrate that into our mapping. So that is definitely the goal, Samantha. So you're on the same page. I'm going to say next question, which is coming from Alan, and he just asked, could you go over again which agencies have a signed MOU and which do not? So that can go to either Tiffany or Joe.
I'll answer it. The NPS and Forest Service have signed agreements. BLM is in the review stage. That should be finalized here soon or sometime in the near future. And then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, that one is, we're working on getting that one going. We need to get some better or more contacts with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, not better contacts, but more contacts. So yes, that one's getting going.
Great. All right, a few more questions here. One from Jeff, and his question is, if a federal agency partially funds a project through an interagency agreement and then does yearly statements of work as funds are added, does it also need a statement of commitment in addition to the interagency agreement? Statement and work plan. So that's a good question for either of you, I think.
And I think I would say no. If you're annually modifying or you're modifying an existing interagency agreement, you're really, the statement of work in that interagency agreement has agreed to items. So if different things come up in the course of the project, you can modify the statement of work if you have an interagency agreement. So I don't think it's absolutely necessary.
Great. All right. I will move to our next question. Keep it moving along. This one is from Keith, and he asks, would a dynamic soils project on BLM land need an agreement? So let's send that to Joe.
A dynamic soil properties project would need a working agreement of some kind, and that could be either a statement of commitment that's attached to their national MOU, or there could be a contribution or an interagency agreement. But I think generally you at least would need a statement of commitment to outline mutual objectives with the partner and other agreed to items.
And Joe, would you say that if an MLRA project leader was looking at a dynamic soil properties project on BLM land, they should reach out to you?
Well, I would, if as they draft their statement of commitment. Yeah, absolutely, John. I'd be happy to answer those questions, but I'd make sure to include regional leadership as well.
Great. For that clarification. All right. I have so far, I think this is our last question right now, a question from Alan. And we might need some additional clarification, Alan, just so you know. Your question right now is written as, where are the technical details found, such as scale or resolution of the final product? So I'm interpreting this as final soil or ecological site product.
Yeah, so the statement of commitments and the statement of work, whether funded or unfunded, those are intentionally, the scale, order, resolution, all those are intentionally left out of those agreements or those written agreements. That information is internal. That information is put in NRCS because that's what we have to do based on our standards, but they are not part of the language that we use in the statements of commitment or statements of work. And that's intentional because you may have areas that are more remote than within your project area or a project extent that, maybe you have access in one location that's better than access in another location. And so you may have varying degrees of scale, resolution, or order within an entire project. Those are discussions that you have, but to propose one order, one scale, or one resolution, I think that gets us in trouble. And so I think what we're doing is intentionally leaving that language off of the statements of work and the statements of commitment.
All right. At this point, we have gone through all the questions that we've received. And so I'm going to shift us to our last view of this presentation, which is the point where I get to thank all of our presenters and our partners for speaking today. This is a lot of great information that we got to share about working on federal lands, and I'm greatly appreciative to all of you. I also will take this moment to announce a few other webinars coming up. So what you'll see in the upper left is our next SPSD webinar that's closest today. It's on creating story maps with Paul Reich. Since we are a webinar series 2 working across federal lands, I also want to highlight our next webinar, which will be January 5th. So that's the first Tuesday in January. We're planning to have these webinar series once a month, the first Tuesday each month. And the name of that next webinar is Soils 2026 and Ecological Sites 2025, Mapping Every Acre. So here's a little short description for you all. Soil and Plant Science Division has set a goal of mapping all soils and ecological sites across the U.S. and making that information available to Web Soil Survey and through EDIT. Regional Directors Jessica Lene and Dave Kingsbury will be presenting on how the division will achieve this goal in Alaska and the continental U.S. respectively through a mix of strategies such as tried and true field mapping, conversion of partner-provided data, as we mentioned earlier, and conversion of the currently available low-resolution mapping. And this is the part I am excited about. Federal partners have a stake in this effort too. Thank you all for joining from outside of NRCS today. You can engage your respective federal liaison to request projects where management needs dictate higher resolution mapping. Big point there is we're excited to work together with our federal agencies to ensure the best available soil science and ecological site science is available. Thank you all for attending today. This webinar was recorded and will be available to those in SPSD and those who email me. My email, again, is john.andrioni@usda.gov. Thank you so much for attending today, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. The webinar